actually, in its own way, a hemshech a little bit to the mimer that we learned of Shabbos of Yud Shvat Tavshin Mem Vav, talking about the Earth Sof L'Mayla Mayla Den Ketz, etc. So let us begin. Siyad L'Shmaya Shabbos Pars B'Shalach Tu B'Shvat Tavshin Mem Vav. Yomer Hashem al Moshe, and Hashem said to Moshe, Ma Tizak Eloi, why do you cry out to me? When the Yidden were by the Yamsuf, and Moshe Rabbeinu was davening to Hashem and saying, relating to Hashem the terrible situation. So Hashem told him, what are you crying out to me? Dabra b'nei Yisrael, speak to the b'nei Yisrael, v'yiso, and let them travel. V'yidu amayim quickly s'mayr chamad mur ba'al he'lula pasuk zeh b'shabes parsh b'shalach tafresh pegimel. It's known the Maimer, my father-in-law, the one whose yahrzeit it is, in other words, Yud Shvat, and this pasuk that he said in Shabbos parsh b'shalach in 1923. The Shabbos Parshas Boy Yud Shvat Tafresh Pegimel. The Maimer that the Frierdiker Rebbe said in Shabbos Parshas B'Shalach Tafresh Pegimel is a continuation of the Maimer that the Rebbe said, that the Frierdiker Rebbe said a previous Shabbos Parshas Boy, which was in Tafresh Pegimel. Shabbos Parshas Boy was also Yud Shvat. Shuru B'Kekuloi. That it's primarily the vast majority of the Maimer of Shabbos Parshas Boy Yud Shvat Taf Reish Pei Gimel is practically the entire Maimer of Basalegani Shabbos Parshas Boy Taf Shin Yud. The whole HaMaimer. The entire Maimer, that the water's yahrzeit is, published in the first installment of the four Mamorim, in the first pamphlet for Shabbos Parshas Boy of the 10th of Shvat Tavshin Yud, who are Maimer the Shabbos Parshas Boy Tavrish Pei Gimel. It's the same Maimer of Shabbos Parshas Boy Tavrish Pei Gimel. So therefore, following in that vein, Maimer said Shabbos Parshas B'Shalach Tafresh Pei Gimel, and the Maimer, which the Rebbe is going to elaborate on, and that this Maimer is based on, which is Shabbos Parshas B'Shalach Tafresh Pei Gimel, Hu Ruboy Hemshech La Maimer the Shabbos Parshas Boy. It is the majority of it a continuation of the Maimer of Shabbos Parshas Boy, which is Hemshech Mamorei Lulu, which is Shabbos Parshas Boy is the series of the Mamorim of the yahrzeit. They also, it is also said amongst Chassidim, I don't know to what degree this is known or not known, that the first Maimer the Rebbe heard from the Frierdiker Rebbe was Shabbos Parshas Boy Tafresh Pei Gimel, which became the foundation for the last Maimer the Frierdiker Rebbe gave out, Shabbos Parshas Boy Tafshin Yud. Anyway, getting back to the Maimer itself. Maybe Sham in that Maimer Shabbos Parshas B'Shalach, the Frierdiker Rebbe brings down Madi Isu Mechilto B'Rishalmi, what is brought on Chazal, Shahayu Arba Kitas B'Yisrael Ba'omdam Alayam. There were four groups of Yidden that were standing at the sea. One wanted to throw themselves into the sea. One wanted to return to Mitzrayim. One wanted to fight them, and one wanted to daven to Hashem. So each one of these groups received a different response. Those that wanted to throw themselves into the sea, Moshe Rabbeinu told them, "Hisyatzvu ru'es Jewish Hashem, stand fast, and you'll see the salvation of Mitzrayim." And those that want to return to Mitzrayim, says, "As you saw Mitzrayim, you will not see them ever again." The one that said that we should do battle with them, so he said, "Hashem yilachem lachem, Hashem will do battle for you." And the one that said that let's cry out in tefillah, he said, "Va'atem tachrishum." And essentially, the Rebbe is just introduced the last two. And he says, "Sha'arba kitas elum," that these four groups of Yidden at the Yam Suf, Heim Arba Deis Mechalokis Mitzad Arba Avoidis Mechalokis. These are four different views because of four different types of service that there is in Avodas Hashem. The Rebbe doesn't go into the 4 different types of service. Therefore, there are 4 responses to each one, because each one is holding on a different level. And the response to the final 2 groups, the one that wanted to go to war and the one that wanted to daven, Moshe Rabbeinu said that Hashem will do battle on your behalf, so you don't have to go to war. And as far as davening, you be silent. This is at the conclusion of the shir of the Monday, the 2nd day of the week of Shabbos of Parshas Bashalach. In the year Tavshin Memvav, when the Rebbe said this Maimer, that's when the Shir Chum, that's what day of the week it came out. It came out on Monday, which is the Shir Chumash that speaks about this. The Isa B'Zoyar, it's brought down the Zoyar concerning the pasuk. It says, "You shall be silent, loy sisarun midi." Do not awaken anything. Do not try to be ma'orer above anything. Top of page long base, and Zoyar and its place on that pasuk, meaning after he goes through in detail the general concept, what's going on, Messiah, the Zoyar concludes, Tצעק. Why do you cry, or what should you cry out to me for? But rather, Hakula Ba'atika Talia Milsa. All of this is dependent on the level of Atik Yoimin, the Pnimius HaKeser, the innermost level of Keser. But B'chai Isa, and in the commentary on Chumash, the B'chai is brought down, the Pirush Tevis Eloi, Al Derech HaPoshatum, in the simple meaning of what Hashem said, what are you crying out to me? Meaning, She'ein HaTover Toli Bi. Now, it's not dependent on me, Hashem says. Ela B'Yisrael, it's dependent on the Jewish people. Daber al Bnei Yisrael v'Yisrael. Speak to the Bnei Yisrael and travel. In other words, you can bring what's called a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Everything is prepared. Now you have to do it. Don't cry to me now. Now you have to go and travel. Moving from this understood, though this entire thing is dependent on in the level of Atik, in higher than Seder Ishtalshus, seemingly beyond even a level of Tefillah. That's why the Zohar says, Loitis Orun Midi, do not awaken anything, do not try to be mamshech anything. But that doesn't mean that the Jewish people don't have a hand in it. Like the B'chai said, like it says, V'atem Tachrishun, you be silent because it's dependent on a very high level. Mikol Malkim Inyan Zeguf is still on this very high level of Atik, Pnimius HaKeser, Nimshachai de Avodas Yisrael comes down through the service of Yidden, Dabar B'nei Yisrael v'Yisrael, speak to the B'nei Yisrael, and they will travel. The point of the idea behind this is, like it's explained over there, in that Maimer of Tafresh Pegimel of the Friedrich Rebbe, the fact that Atik, the level of Keser, comes down, it's for the sake of the service of the Yidden, that they should be victorious in Hashem's war, which is a lot of the theme of the Basa Lagani Hemshech about bringing victory for the king. As we will learn later on, that's what it says, speak to the Bnei Yisrael, let them travel, because the Yidden, in their traveling, are doing the job of being victorious in the war, and that is the level of Keser that is manifest, and for that purpose, Keser comes down. So it says in line 13, he explains concerning this, both in the Maimer from B'Shalach Tofresh Pei Gimel, and also in the series of Mamorim of Yud Shvat, the Avodas Yisrael B'chlal, the Avodas HaMelchama Lilachem Mechemes Hashem. The Yidden service in general is the avoid of a war, to do battle, the wars of Hashem. Ubeshvil nitzach Muhammadun, for the sake of being victorious in this war, Pesach Lamakadosh Baruch Hu Eitzer Shalom Ma'ila Hashem opens up for them the treasure of above. Ukmoishu b'melch basar v'dam, like it's in a king of flesh and blood. Shebeshvil nitzuach haminagid, for the sake of being victorious over the opponent. Hareu mevaz ve'ezoi troisov, so he completely spends and gives away his treasures. Ad la'oitzres dahain yakar, until the treasures of a great wealth. Hanes of v'nikbas v'meshach kameshanim edorach hador adi avois v'amlachim, that was collected and gathered throughout many years, generation after generation, through his fathers, the kings. That was never used for any purpose. In a similar vein, it's the king of above. Why and how do we compare the king of above to the king down here below? The king down here below is similar to the king above, because every single Jew is called an Adam. Why is he called Adam? Because I'm a liken to above. So we see that the idea of what goes down here below is a reflection and sourced and is rooted in what happens above. So the fact that a king down here below will expend his treasures, will never expend his treasures under any circumstance, that's also a similar thing the king above. On the other hand, for the sake of being victorious, just like the king below will expend all the treasures, so too the king above. So he says in line 25, for the sake of being victorious in the war, he opens up the treasures of above, in the way of giving it away without any cheshbonos. In a war, there are two types of war, two concepts in a war. One thing is to gain spoils of war. The second idea is the idea of the war to be victorious over opponents. The idea of getting spoils of war. It's something that's comparable to and can be calculated and can be numbered in the treasures that the king collected and his forefathers. So therefore, top of page Lamed Gimel, since the spoils of war, that those spoils is not as important as the treasures that the king has from many generations beforehand, that he would expend for a war. The king will not just expend the treasures, because it's a calculated thing. You're going to risk all the treasures that you have, that your forefathers collected, etc., for what's going to happen, the spoils that you're going to bring in. It's not worth it. As opposed to a war that's for the sake of defeating an opponent. That's the primary and true idea of a war, standing up to someone that's an opponent. To bring about his victory, that things should run according to his desires and wishes. The idea that he should be victorious, that his wishes should be followed, that matters to the very essence of the king. To such a degree, like the Maimer of the Friedrich Rebbe says, that the king is willing to throw his life away just so that the victory should take place. Like it says, also the everlasting one of the Eden will not be false. I think the raya from the pasuk over here is that the idea of not being false means consistency and constancy, that nothing changes. So it's not a matter of something that can be weighed against losses and gains, but rather it's to the end. This idea of the victory in the war, that he needs his wishes should be fulfilled, is incomparable at all in comparison to the treasures that the king had gathered. Therefore the king expands the treasures for the sake of the victory in the war. And even more so, that also his life, the king throws away. He's willing to risk his entire life. So now we're going to get to what we're speaking about in Perek Zayin, and what we also spoke about in the Tafshin Memvav Maimer of Basel Lagani on Oyster Zayin. Oyster Beis, line 13. To be able to understand the idea of the treasure above. The Maimer explains the this is what is brought down to Kunizayar. The infinite light of Hashem is high above to no end and below to no end. And in chapter 16 of the Maimer of Basel Gani of the Hemshech, he explains that these are two levels in the infinite light of Hashem. When his Bar Leil was explained previously, meaning in the Basel Lagani, the Maimer of Tafshin Memvav, Hachidush Bezeh, the novelty of this is also in the very light itself, not just being two separate levels, but in the very same level itself, there's two levels, Yashtei Madreges. That this light is above and above to no end. That goes up higher and higher, and one concealment after another concealment to no end. And that very light is down here below to no end. It comes down even more revelation until there is no measure, there is no end to how far the Gilui can come down to, the revelation can come down to. From the perspective of Hashem's essence, these two lines, the concealment and the revelation, how high he conceals himself and how low he reveals himself, is equal. There's no preference of one over the other. And the Maimer continues, these two ideas, that the infinite light of Hashem is above to no end and below to no end. Are two levels of the transcendent light. Makif der Yasher, Makif der Chayzer, the Makif of the direct light, the Makif of the rebounding light. The Makif der Yasher, Makif HaKorv, the Makif, the transcendent level of the direct light, who Makif HaKorv is a close transcendent revelation, top of page Lamed Daled, Makif der Chayzer, and the transcendent level of the rebounding light, who Makif HaRachik is a distant Makif. And this Bar Le'el was explained previously over there in that Maimer Sham, the Shnei Inyanim Elu, these two levels of the Makif HaRachik and Makif HaKorev, these are two levels in Keser. Okay, like it's known, in the sphere of Keser, there's two levels. Bechinas Arich Ampin, we spoke about that. What does it mean, Arich Ampin? That there's the level of the faces, that the faces is also the level of the days. Faces and days, those are the spheres of Atzilus. So it has a connection with the level of Ampin, it has a connection with the level of the days, the spheres of Atzilus, but it's Arich. It's a level that's long, very big, very great, meaning there's an association, but it's above it. That's a close makif. What does it mean? Atik, it's uprooted and completely separated from the category and definition of days of the spheres of Atzilus. That's the distant makif. In the drawing down of this treasure from above. It's explained in that Maimer, the order in administering and distributing this treasure, that the treasures are distributed through the ministers, the officers, that they are the officers in charge of the army. The intention is not for the sake of the officers themselves, specifically the soldiers, that they specifically are doing and making the victory. In a similar vein is understood in the drawing down of the treasure from above. Is the level of the infinite light of Hashem, is above to no end and below to no end. That this treasure of the Ein Sof is transmitted and distributed through the officers, through the ministers, the officers in charge of the army. These are Ve'emar Nisim, and they are distributed to every single Jew for the sake of the victory in the war. We could say this is also the explanation what my father-in-law said. The Friedrich Rebbe said that the Mezritcher Magid and the Baal Shem Tov are the two levels of Kesser. And then he spoke about, if I remember correctly, that the Alter Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe, and Tzedek Chabad, etc. But he says, Baal Shem Tov, Atik Yomin, the Baal Shem Tov is the level of Pnimius HaKesser, Atik Yomin, the level that's uprooted from all the days, which we said before is Lamaila than Ketz, above to no end. Rava Magid B'chinas Arich Ampin Lamata Den Tachlis. The Mezritcher Magid is Arich Ampin, which reaches down below to no end. And the Rebbe is going to explain now what the meaning is by associating the Baal Shem Tov and the Mezritcher Magid with these two levels. Be it who line 25, the explanation of this matter is. Do it's known Shabbat Shem Tov hoye bebchina kezu shayinetak umuvdol legamli minyoni yoyim. The Baal Shem Tov was such a level that was completely uprooted from matters of yoyim. What does that mean? There's an expression amongst Chassidim when we want to talk about doing miracles, being out of this world. They use a term called Abal Shem Skan Haga, acting in a manner of the Baal Shem. That he did not take in consideration whatsoever the categories, the definitions of the world, which is the same idea of the infinite light of Hashem that is beyond to no end. But we said that the purpose of the Rabbeim were like the officers and the ministers, that they are distributing it to the soldiers. Along with the fact that it was the Baal Shem Skan Hag above and beyond, he drew this down in all Yidden. As it's known, that the way he acted was that he would go in, Mahalach Ba'Yors Yisrael, he would travel through Jewish cities and towns, and he revealed in the Jewish people the concealed treasure that was in them. Through asking the ordinary Jews that they should respond to him, Baruch Hashem, praise be Hashem. When the ordinary person said Baruch Hashem and Geloibt is the Rebishter, he means Hashem's very essence, top of Lamed Hey. And then we're going to talk about the concept of Hareini Mispal Dasa Atinik by Tzadikim. They could be talking about different types of levels, but an ordinary Jew, he says Baruch Hashem, he doesn't know of any Chachmas, he's talking about Hashem himself. We'll stop over here.